The other conversation that we're having, the other event that's playing out, is regarding the union protests today. 4 union federations. We understand that there might be a situation in KwaZulu-Natal. We'll take you live to the Premier there, Sekela Zikalala. Appears he's preparing to receive a memorandum on behalf of his provincial government. In the meantime, the other big story at the moment, the focus of the conversation is around, of course, Ace Magashule and the claims that the Hawks were about to arrest the Secretary-General of the ANC. Well, the Hawks have denied that an arrest is imminent, but there's been intense speculation that Magashule could be arrested for his role in corruption in the Free State when he was Premier. At the same time, the ANC Youth League in that province and the ANC in the Vembe region have both publicly said that they're supporting Magashule. The Radical Economic Transformation Group has said the same. I'm joined now by Professor Ivor Sarakinsky from the Wits School of Governance. Professor, good afternoon to you. The politics is all pretty intense around this. What happens in the ANC if Ace Magashule is actually arrested?
Well, if he is arrested, it's going to be terribly dramatic because it would be the first high-ranking political official who's finally held to account for so many of the actions we're familiar with now. So the symbolic significance of that is immense, in that the pincer movement is now starting to inflict pain on high-ranking politicians, not just medium and low-level operations.
The Secretary-General of the ANC plays such a key role. I mean, it would seem to me to be very, very difficult for him to stay on in that role if he were charged.
Well, that's all about the previous NEC meetings, which fought over do you stand down if you're charged, and the compromise was you appear before the ANC Integrity Commission. And I think that compromise was linked to an expectation that high-ranking ANC officials are going to be in the sights of the prosecuting authorities shortly. So that was a preemptive mover, and I think that enough ambiguity is in place for him to hold his office, even if the charges are laid against him.
I mean, it would mean that every single interview with every single ANC representative in every single forum would be about the fact that their Secretary-General faces charges. I mean, there would be intense public pressure, surely.
Indeed, and that public pressure might not result in the high-ranking officials standing down, because the stakes are too high to simply stand down in the light of public pressure. So we've seen before that various personalities in the RET camp have thick skins, and it's no longer about the credibility of the ANC in the public eye. The credibility of the ANC in the public eye has become part of the bargaining game within the ANC itself. And the possibilities of inflicting collateral damage in terms of saving oneself are what this is all about.
How far would this go? I mean, let me put it another way, and maybe I'm taking this too far, Professor, but there'll be some structures in the ANC who might refuse to accept his authority if he refuses to step aside. Would that be going too far?
Well, that's a possibility, and we wait to see if that is the case. Should he be arrested? Because there's lots of ambiguity and uncertainty about the strength of the branches in the ANC and which side of the conflicts in the ANC they stand. There's claims that as Secretary General, he's responsible for the branches and has mobilized the branches around him. So if there is an arrest, we wait to see, because that will be the clearest indicator that we have of the power base that the RET grouping has inside the ANC itself. So it's difficult to predict.
It's interesting to me, I mean, if you look at who's come out in support of him, so the ANC Youth League in the Free State, not a big body, the RET group, not great, not huge, the Vembe region. I mean, it's not like, and it really isn't like, former President Jacob Zuma, who had so much of the party behind him. This is actually very different. Doesn't that play a key role? I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that no big constituency in the ANC has publicly pledged support to Magashule.
So that has two possible options in terms of answering. The first is that he doesn't have support, or the RET grouping doesn't have support, or they do have support, but the personalities aren't coming out publicly yet. And the second route of argument here is that the big fight isn't going to be in terms of leadership personalities in the ANC now. The big fight is about electing future ANC leaders. And that means mobilizing the branches who vote in 2022 for the next set of ANC leaders. And maybe the RET grouping is keeping their powder dry for the 22 electoral conference. So many permutations and so much uncertainty that we need to be cautious about grabbing at particular incidents and events as an anchor to understand what's going on.
And at the same time, of course, any member of the top 6 of the ANC is elected to that position by a conference. They actually can't really be forced to resign, can they?
Well, there's no constitutional mechanism to force them to resign, but pressure can be levered on them, as was the case with former President Zuma some time back. So there is a precedent to lever pressure in order to get a resignation, and it depends on how strong the top 6 is, and it depends on the balance of power in the NEC to see whether that pressure will result in someone like the Secretary General, for example, should there be an arrest, to stand down. So the power dynamics is completely wide open, and it's very, very difficult to judge who has the upper hand.
It's also, I mean, it's fascinating at the same time, because in the past, the relationship between the leader of the ANC and the Secretary General of the ANC has almost been absolutely key to what happens. This would be the first time in my memory since 1994 that the Secretary General and the leader of the ANC come from different factions. And we've seen that sort of tension play out so many times.
Absolutely. So we know that there are divisions at the upper end of the ANC in terms of the top 6 and the NEC. We don't know what's going on underneath in terms of the tip of the iceberg, with the base of the iceberg big underwater, and that's the branches. And the caution of the president of the ANC is indicative that he's not too confident about the support base amongst the branches, whereas the Secretary General is probably more confident about his position, seeing that he mobilizes, he registers, and he signs off on the credibility of branch members voting in ANC processes. So a complex, multifaceted, multidimensional chess game underway at the moment.
What then does President Cyril Ramaphosa do? So he obviously would have been a prime force behind what I suppose we could call the line in the sand decision. In other words, the decision by the NEC that those implicated in corruption must step aside. He would be a big player in that. There would be public pressure for him to speak about the Secretary General of his own party being implicated and being arrested in relation to corruption, if all of this were to happen, still hypothetical. And yet, politically, it might not be the most sensible thing to do.
Indeed. So if he comes out publicly, it means that he's put his cards on the table, and all the accusations about partisanship and interference will come through. So if I were him, I would follow a strategy of intelligent inaction, and I would sit back and watch and wait, because there's so much information in the public domain in terms of Estina Dairy, the asbestos roofing, and to let those dynamics play themselves out before coming out publicly with a statement, and to wait for all that information to wash out in the public arena, which will inevitably tarnish so many of the actors who allegedly have been involved in that.
In other words, it's about witness testimony. You get witness testimony under oath live on Newzroom, and what you find is that the narrative changes.
Yes. Yes, so not to come out too early now and watch and wait, and there's just so much that is still to come out, in addition to what we already know, that could weaken the RET actors in terms of the fight for the heart, soul and mind of the ANC.
Intelligent in action. I'm going to remember that phrase for a while. Professor, thank you very much indeed. Professor Ivor Sarakinsky at the Wits School of Governance. Breaking